I'm well, thanks. How about you?
I'm doing great. I wanted to add, when we asked you to come on the show, it was prior to the pardon kerfuffle and the new head of the FBI and the new AG, and I want to thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you for not calling up and saying, I have COVID, which you could have done. How hard is it? You were at DOJ for how long?
27 years.
27 years.
But who's counting you?
No, none of us.
Yeah.
What is your impression now? Tell us a little bit about what's so crucial about the DOJ. What do they do? I think we don't necessarily have an understanding of the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking that, because I know a lot of people get their vision of the Department of Justice on the high-profile things that go on in the news.
Right.
But I can tell you that what you have at DOJ is a group of people, Republicans and Democrats, who are there, who are absolutely devoted to justice. And I know that sounds incredibly corny, but these are people who want to be public servants. They want to make this country safer for all Americans. And so they prosecute child pornography cases,
right,
and human trafficking and drug cartels and gangs and
this is the majority of the work.
Oh, absolutely. This is the majority of the work across the board that is done in a nonpartisan way. And, I had the privilege of working with these folks for so many years and saw them truly struggle over cases, not just whether they could get the indictment or get the conviction, but in trying to do the thing that was fair and just. Because that is, and I know this sounds corny, that is the sole responsibility of the Department of Justice, is to seek justice. Now, not everybody's going to agree with you when you take actions about whether those things are just or fair. But that is the responsibility.
Did you see in your time when you were there, did you see the mission begin to change? Did you see it become politicized while you were there? When you first started, was it much more nuts and bolts? Because I guess that's not the part of the Department of Justice that I also think about. I think about after 9/11, John Yoo getting the Department of Justice to justify torture. Or, that is there another hallway where, there's another Department of Justice where, you guys are working on human trafficking, but they're there trying to justify other, maybe less, what you would say, high-minded things?
Yeah. Look, the vast majority of folks at the Department of Justice are what they call career employees. And that doesn't mean that they're necessily there their entire careers.
Deep state. I know what this is.
I'm not even entirely sure what the deep state is. But
it's a state that's very deep. Don't play dumb with us.
But that's there literally are maybe 100, well, if you count U.S. attorneys, a few hundred political appointees out of 113,000 employees at the Department of Justice.
There's 113,000.
Now, because understand, this includes not just the folks who are prosecutors and lawyers there, it includes investigative agencies like the FBI and the ATF and DEA and the Marshal Service. It includes all of the Bureau of Prisons. It's a lot of people. So it's a very, very small number of people who change with administrations and change depending on who the party is. So, yeah, the hallways there are filled with people who don't even know. I worked for over 20 years in the Atlanta U.S. Attorney's Office. I had no idea whether the folks next to me were Democrats or Republicans. Didn't know when I prosecuted public corruption cases. You
were down in Atlanta and you didn't know if they were Republicans? So
yeah. Okay, Atlanta is a blue dot inside an otherwise red state, but there were plenty of Republicans in our office.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, there were plenty of Democrats as well.
I believe that.
Yeah. Are you going to believe anything I say?
I do.
Okay, good.
The way you can tell is you just do this. You walk in and you go, who wants Chick-fil-A? Then you know. You. So that's such an interesting, because, look, it's very difficult for me to trust the status quo of all these alphabet agencies, FBI, ATF, the other ones that you mentioned, because so often they are, and maybe it's not the bulk of what they do, but spying on Americans after 9/11 through the Department of Homeland Security. And I know they're not all related. So we're in this sort of uncomfortable position of saying the rule of law is important, but wouldn't you agree it's often bent against, it is a rigged system in a lot of ways, just maybe not rigged against politicians, but rigged against the poor or people that don't have the means. You know, when you look at crack cocaine being sentenced at a different level than powder cocaine because of the populations that were more associated with it. How do we have faith? We're being asked to save this system that my whole life I've sort of viewed very suspiciously. You know, from Hoover on up. You know, you can't go through learning about Martin Luther King without thinking to yourself, damn, you know, we weaponize the government against citizens. So what are the safeguards against that? What is the checks and balances? You clearly believe in it deeply.
I do, yeah. And, you know, I think some suspicion is not a bad thing because I think it's really important that we hold these institutions and the people who work there and who are in charge of them accountable. But, you know, you're right. Our nation's core promise, our fundamental promise that we made to all the people is a promise of equal justice. Mm-hmm. That is a promise our country has never completely fulfilled. There have long been racial disparities in our criminal justice system. There are economic disparities. I would agree with you that there is, as much as you try to guard against that, there is a disparity between those defendants who are wealthy and those who are not. But it has always been the goal. It's always been the thing to which we aspired, to be able to make good on that promise of equal justice. And that's what I fear is being lost. I recognize that, look, I'm not here as a Democrat or a Republican. I am a Democrat, but I'm not here as one or the other.
I could tell what we had catered to your dressing room. I know.
Now I've totally lost my train of thought.
You're not here as a Democrat. You're here to talk about
be so good,
the importance. I was right there. You're right there. You got this. Come, bring it to me. Bring it to me.
No, but what was the question? Sorry.
Damn it. Yeah. I am so sorry for derailing that because you were getting to, I think what you were getting to is it's a system that has flaws, but that every day you've worked towards, boy, you hate to say a more perfect union on it, but that you've worked towards making it more just.
Absolutely, and that has been the goal. And so
why is this a threat when you just said, like, the threat now?
The threat now, and this is not because he's a Republican. Donald Trump poses a unique threat to our criminal justice system and to that concept of equal justice. He's made really clear over and over again that he views the Department of Justice as his own personal goon squad, for lack of a better term here, to go after the people that he wants to retaliate against, whether those are folks who have crossed him politically, whether it's people who just disagreed with him, whether it's people who wouldn't carry his water, that he wants to use the power of the state to literally criminally investigate them and try to send them to prison. Right. And he's been really clear about that. And
now, as devil's advocate.
I figured this was coming.
All right. Wouldn't he say that's what was done to him? That because he was a candidate for president, that in his mind, and I'm not suggesting I'm in his mind, but you know, that's what he believes, the Russia investigation, that's what he believes all of these cases, whether we believe them to be meritorious or not, what he would suggest is an unprecedented use of the Department of Justice is how they've been operating against him. And so that firewall has already been breached, in his mind.
Well, first of all, if he thinks that, and I'm not 100% convinced he genuinely thinks that, but even if he does, that doesn't make it true. Right. Are you telling me that when someone fomented an insurrection, as he did, that DOJ should just look away from that and not investigate it.
By the way, my belief was always, why didn't we look into that? I wanted more alacrity on that before he was a candidate again. Why were those wheels so difficult to start to churn?
Yeah, look, people have different approaches, and I think that my understanding is they were looking at it as a bottom-up approach of the people who were out there, you know, actually storming the Capitol. I mean, I think in retrospect, you could look at that and see those folks probably don't have evidence in terms of direct conversations with Donald Trump, so maybe that wasn't the way to go. But you know, that's hindsight, and that's me from outside saying that.
Right,
but look, I don't think the department should be the least bit apologetic about pursuing that, and I agree. If anything, I think we all wish it had been done sooner.
Right, and then the documents case in the same way, because it is. The difficulty was in that documents case, they go down there, they make a big deal, they raid the whole place, and then a week later, they're like, oh, yeah, Biden's got a bunch of boxes in his garage. And you're like, what is going on?
Okay, not ideal. I will grant you that. That's not, yeah.
But do you understand how this
I also think it's a false
erodes-
equivalency, John, and I can tell you don't agree with me. Look,
How is it a false equivalence in that, yeah, he cooperated less, but if the idea is, you know, there's a lot of things that go into classified documents. We have a terrible system of classification. We overclassify everything. We redact everything. You know, very clearly, they took a much harder line approach than they have probably with any other president. Look, I'm no fan of this guy. I think he absolutely runs roughshod over what would be democratic checks and balances. But as an outside observer, it's hard not to see cracks in the case that there weren't a lot of, and we can call it false equivalency or not, but it's close enough that it would give you pause.
Well, I will say, you know, there was a special counsel that was appointed to investigate Biden in the Biden administration. I seriously doubt President Biden was too thrilled about that.
Right. But is this special counsel thing part of the whole thing? Like, I remember Whitewater. You know, when we set up, I think maybe part of the point is when you have a system of justice that's 130,000 employees, and they're all dedicated, talented lawyers who believe in their case, isn't there always the danger that turning their spotlight on anything will reveal enough faults and crevices and cracks to find justification for legal peril?
I think that is a risk of a special counsel. I mean, you should never investigate a person. That's a problem. You should never turn the spotlight on a person and say, can I find a crime? Because there's probably a pretty good chance you could find something out there on just about everybody.
Why are you staring at me when you say that?
Well, I was with DOJ for 27 years, and I'm just saying.
All I'm saying is recreational shrooms, I thought, were legal. Once they put them in chocolate, I think that technically makes it candy. I think. But that's my point to the, you know, there is a lot of fear about the weaponization of this department. And I think possibly justified. I guess we're not going to know. There's certainly enough breadcrumbs there. They're certainly explicitly saying it. But I do look at our legal system as overreach has been a part of its history since, you know, look, I hate to keep going back to, you know, Hoover, but it's difficult when you have a large organization like that, is it not? What are the checks on that?
Yeah, and that's where I wish so much that people could, for example, sit in the conference room in the Atlanta U.S. Attorney's Office when we would have meetings with, we called them indictment review committee meetings. Sounds really exciting, doesn't it? And
was there cake?
Only at the end.
Yes.
And people would come in and they would present the case, and oftentimes it's not a question of whether the evidence is there or not. The question is, even when the evidence is there, is this the kind of thing that is really worthy of federal prosecution? Is this the kind of conduct where we should be using our resources, and this person should be a convicted felon at the end of it? Because there's not resources to prosecute everything, nor should you necessarily prosecute every single transgression that occurs. You're supposed to use that prosecutorial discretion to make sure that you're being fair and that you're using the laws in the most effective way. And people really would agonize
that seems
over
so
this.
subjective in many ways.
Sure it is.
So
Yeah.
it's not where the evidence leads you. It's also the evidence leads us here, but is that worthy of our time and effort? Is that?
That's a portion of it. It's worthy
Right.
of our time and effort. And is this conduct significant enough and bad enough to where this person should be prosecuted federally? Like, for example, drug cases.
Sure.
Most
Makes up the majority, yeah.
street-level drug cases could be prosecuted federally. Does that make any sense? No, we should not be using federal resources on that. And a person who's involved in a street-level deal really doesn't need to have a federal conviction. So if that's prosecuted at all, as opposed to diversion or some other program, that should be handled by the state. Technically, is it a federal crime? Yes. But is that a good use of resources? And is that necessarily
So that
the most
goes
just
into
way to go?
each time.
Absolutely.
So why are there so many people in federal prisons on drug charges?
Well, part of that is left over from the past. No, seriously, where people during the crack epidemic in sentences that were way too long were being prosecuted, and they are still in federal prison. Now, President Obama did
They're
a
still
clemency-
there.
Some of them are, yeah. President Obama had a clemency initiative to try to adjust those and released scores of people who were just in prison for way too long, longer than public safety demanded there. And the guidelines have been changed now, but there's some leftovers that are there. But also, DOJ prosecutes major drug cartels that are operating here in the United States. That's
Right.
the major distinction.
So you're
between
going
what's
for
done
you're going
federally.
for the
Yeah.
big, not
Yeah.
the little. Now,
Right.
They used to do the other, but now they've
Absolutely used
flipped
to
it
do
to that.
that.
What about
Right.
financial crimes?
To me, that's where the department it really should be focusing a lot of
Right.
its resources.
Is that where they're focusing a lot of the resources?
Yeah, there are a lot of resources there. It's the only game in town. Local DAs can't do that. And these are like some of the most pernicious crimes where they are really preying on people's hard-earned
You're talking about like payday loan, that kind of.
I mean, yeah, the full range of white-collar stuff. I say that I used to be a white-collar prosecutor.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Why was it so hard after 2008? Why didn't anybody go to jail for that after the financial crisis?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you know what I'm saying about the case for the DOJ? Two steps forward, one step back.
Yeah.
Two steps forward,
Yeah.
one step back. So in your mind, though, the reforms that need to be done there, who would do those reforms? Who would reform the Department of Justice? Is it the nation's Attorney General? Is that who would make these changes in who should go? Like who's in charge?
Well, the Attorney General is in charge,
Okay.
but when you say would make these reforms, what reforms are you talking about?
Letting people out that had crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, putting more resources in front of like the banks that launder money for terrorists and yet only pay a fine, which has happened numerous times over these past couple of decades. All the things that we look at as dodging of accountability for, establishment status quo things, and seeing poor people being sent to jail at a much higher rate. Who comes in there and says, we have to stop this?
Yeah, that's done by the leadership at the Department of Justice, which includes the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General and the heads of the different divisions, like the Criminal Division, Antitrust
They'll
Division,
decide what to focus on.
And then each individual U.S. attorney. There are 93 U.S. attorneys around the country. And they are in charge, broken up geographically. And they're in charge of the prosecution and the civil defense side as well, of the prosecution of all federal crimes in that particular district. And within that district, one of the things that U.S. attorneys are responsible for doing is looking at that district and saying, okay, what are the most serious crime threats here? And mine was the Northern District of Georgia.
Okay.
What's the most serious thing here? Where should we be using our limited resources? And what should be handled by the state? And, districts are different. My district is going to be different than like Iowa or some place like that.
Right.
But that's done at the leadership, and then that is to be carried out by all of the career people who are within the department.
Now, if they get an attorney general who comes in there and says, I want you to prosecute journalists and Democrats and short Jews. Purely hypothetical.
What if it's a threefer?
Go for all three.
Yeah, okay.
What is the recourse there? Do they just argue it, or do they say, we keep hearing about they threatened a mass resignation, but for Donald Trump, that would be what he wants. He would want people who wouldn't do that to say bye-bye, and he'd just fill them with other people.
Right. Well, look, if that, first of all, we know there already are career people at the Department of Justice who are looking for jobs because they are worried about being in a Justice Department that is weaponized in this way and not for legitimate reasons. And if you are told to do something like that, you have a few options. You can say no. Maybe they find another prosecutor to do it. You can resign, which is another option. You can also raise it, if you think something is really out of bounds, you can raise it to what they call the Inspector General within the Department of Justice. If you're being told...
Who's that?
Yeah, Michael Horowitz is his name.
No, I was a rhetorical question, but I mean, what's the role of the Inspector General?
The Inspector General looks at fraud and abuse and misconduct within the Department of Justice.
Oh, I see. Like an inspector.
Right.
General.
Hence the name. Yeah.
Is it hard talking to people like me?
At times.
Who don't seem to understand anything. And so, in your mind, are there enough fail-safes? If this is the worst-case scenario is going to come to pass, do you believe that that system is robust enough to withstand that type of thing?
I think it has to be. I mean, we don't have a choice. It's going to have to be robust enough. And look, I am hopeful that even though, look, the president has identified 4 people who were members of his criminal defense team or impeachment team to be in top 4 slots at the department. That's not a great sign, coming from a guy who...
Is that on you? Don't they normally pick, like, lawyers they've worked with or people that they know?
No, they pick people they know, but not usually like their criminal defense lawyers. Well, happily, we've not had that many presidents who needed criminal defense lawyers.
Sure.
But look, there's nothing wrong with a president wanting someone in whom they have confidence, in someone that they trust. The problem is here that Donald Trump complained about Jeff Sessions. Where's my Roy Cohn? Which, it's sort of infamous or famous mob lawyer there.
Yes.
He expected the Attorney General to act as his personal henchman. That's what he's looking for. So when he puts the folks in there that were his criminal defense
what's the
attorneys,
difference
but
between
I'm hopeful still. I want to give a little
Yeah, please.
that they, despite of how they might be getting there, that they're going to take their oath seriously and recognize they do not represent Donald Trump. They represent the people of the United States.
And the Constitution.
And the Constitution.
Your mouth to God's ears. Former Deputy U.S. Attorney General Sally Yates.